Hello, my name is Nicole Mashburn, and today I'm going to talk to you about the anterior pituitary. Let's get started. So hopefully you have watched a few videos and already started to learn a little bit about the endocrine system and the pituitary. So let's do a little bit of review. This is our setup. We have our hypothalamus and we have our pituitary, which is divided into the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. Hopefully you've already learned a little bit about the posterior pituitary. Just for review, you have your hypothalamus, which makes oxytocin, antidiuretic hormone in the hypothalamus, sends it to the posterior pituitary where it's stored until it's needed. Now the anterior pituitary is a little bit different. Instead of the hypothalamus making the hormone and it being stored in the anterior pituitary, the hypothalamus makes releasing and inhibiting hormones that it sends to the anterior pituitary, causing the anterior pituitary to then release its own hormones. So let's kind of talk about that. If you look at an old textbook, you'll see the anterior pituitary is known as the master gland. That's because the anterior pituitary makes a lot of different endocrine hormones that go to a lot of different glands around the body and have a lot of different effects. So it's known as the master gland. But we have learned since that actually the hypothalamus is the master of this master gland. So how this works is you have the hypothalamus making releasing and inhibiting hormones, and they enter into what's called a portal system. So these hormones are made up here. We'll just make a little hormone, whatever, make a little hormone. It enters into this capillary bed, travels through this portal system into the anterior pituitary. Once it reaches the anterior pituitary, it causes the anterior pituitary to release different hormones. And then those hormones will then leave the anterior pituitary into the blood and go out to their target organs. So we're going to talk about the different types of releasing hormones, the different types of inhibiting hormones, and the different types of hormones that the anterior pituitary actually makes and releases. And this is just another way, kind of a schematic to help you kind of keep this organized. We have our hypothalamus, and this is just an example of hormones, a hormone cascade. So you have hypothalamic hormones, hormones that are made by the hypothalamus that stimulate or inhibit the anterior pituitary. So in this case, you have thyrotropin releasing hormone. So that's made in the hypothalamus, made up here, travels through that portal system to the anterior pituitary and causes the anterior pituitary to release TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. That thyroid stimulating hormone then travels in the blood to the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland then produces thyroid hormone, which then goes out to its target organ and causes its effect. Now, so you have basically three different steps. The hypothalamus releases a hormone, causing the anterior pituitary to release a hormone, causing another gland, in this case the thyroid, to release a hormone. Then you have your effect on an organ. Now hopefully you remember back about negative feedback loops. When you have enough thyroid hormone out in the system, that's going to feed back to the anterior pituitary and say, we don't need any more, and to the hypothalamus saying, don't send any more TRH, that way we won't get any more TSH, there'll be no more thyroid hormone. So it's just a feedback loop. So if you don't have enough thyroid hormone, you don't have this feedback loop, the hypothalamus makes more TRH, makes the anterior pituitary send out more TSH. The more TSH you have, stimulates your thyroid gland to send out more thyroid hormone. This is just constantly going around in a circle, in a feedback loop, increasing and decreasing the amount of thyroid hormone you ultimately have going out to your target cells. Now let's talk about the different types of hypothalamic hormones. All these in blue, these are the hormones from the hypothalamus. These are hypothalamic hormones. They're either releasing hormones, which means they stimulate the anterior pituitary, or they're inhibiting hormones, which means they inhibit the anterior pituitary. Okay? So I've written out the word form and the letter form. You're usually just going to see the letter form, but if you know what it means, it kind of lets you know what it does. So corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. All right, that means this is from the hypothalamus. That causes the anterior pituitary to release ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropin hormone. We're going to go over those in just a second. You have gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH. That causes the stimulation or release of FSH and LH. Again, we'll talk about what those are in just a second. You have growth hormone-releasing hormone, kind of a nice name. So what does it do? It causes growth hormone to be released by the anterior pituitary. Thyrotropin-releasing hormone, known as TRH, causes the release of TSH by the anterior pituitary. And prolactin-releasing hormone causes the release of prolactin by the anterior pituitary. Now, if the hypothalamus releases GHIH, which is growth hormone inhibiting hormone, then you inhibit the release of growth hormone by the anterior pituitary. If the hypothalamus releases prolactin inhibiting hormone, then you reduce or stop the release of prolactin by the anterior pituitary. Now, sometimes you'll see GHIH written as somatostatin, same thing. So you've got your releasing hormones, which stimulate the anterior pituitary, and your inhibiting hormones, which inhibit the anterior pituitary. So go back to your picture. So these are the hormones that are coming from the hypothalamus and either stimulating or inhibiting the anterior pituitary. If it stimulates it, the anterior pituitary sends out hormones to whatever gland. It may be the thyroid, maybe an ovary, maybe a testes, whatever, or nothing happens. No hormones are released. Okay, so what are the anterior pituitary hormones? You have basically 7. The first 4 are known as tropic. And a tropic hormone is a hormone that stimulates another gland to release another hormone. So you have a hormone released upon another gland, causing that gland to release another hormone. So the first 4 are the tropic hormones. TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. It's tropic. It causes the thyroid to release a hormone. You have ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone. It works on the adrenal gland. Now, it specifically works on the adrenal gland cortex, the adrenal cortex. Adreno means adrenal, cortico meaning cortex, so it acts on the adrenal cortex, and it will stimulate another hormone to be released. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. Works on the ovary and testes, causing them to release something. We'll talk about that in a few seconds. And then luteinizing hormone. Its target, again, the ovary and the testes, causing them to do something. Now, the last 3 are not tropic. They act on their organ from the anterior pituitary straight to that organ and cause an effect. So anterior pituitary hormone, prolactin, is released, goes to breast tissue for milk production. And the anterior pituitary releases growth hormone. That makes you grow. Works on bones, muscles, makes you grow. And the last one is MSH. It's called melanocyte stimulating hormone. It's just kind of a little extra hormone we throw in there. We'll talk about it in just a second. Okay, I like this slide. I borrowed it from an old textbook. It's pretty cool. Just to remind you that hormones work through the blood. Okay, so this is the hypothalamus. It's releasing these and inhibiting hormones into the blood. Okay, that blood is then going through that portal system to the anterior pituitary, causing an effect. The anterior pituitary is then releasing its hormones into the blood again, where it travels throughout the body to these target organs. So you can see you've got the hypothalamus releasing all these plus and minus releasing factors and inhibiting factors, causing the anterior pituitary then to release hormones, which then go to these target organs. And we're going to break this down one section at a time and talk about the different anterior pituitary hormones and what they do. Now I want to start with TSH and ACTH. You're going to get more later. I'm going to go ahead and say more later. There's going to be a whole video on these. I'm just going to cover the basics. Thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, leaves the anterior pituitary when it's been stimulated by a hypothalamus. TSH travels through the blood to your thyroid. Your thyroid's right in here. Travels to the thyroid and causes the thyroid to secrete T3 and T4. Those are thyroid hormones. We call these our metabolic hormones. You've probably heard of someone who's hypothyroid or hyperthyroid. They're hypothyroid. They're always kind of cold, maybe a little overweight, sluggish. Hyperthyroid, they're all kind of excited, maybe hot all the time, that kind of thing. So that kind of helps keep our metabolism at a homeostatic level. ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, travels from the anterior pituitary through the blood to the cortex of the adrenal gland. And if you guys took 201, you know where the adrenal gland is. You better. It's right above the kidneys. So there's one on each side. You have the little adrenal gland, the cortex, that outer section, and it causes the adrenal gland to secrete aldosterone, cortisol, and androgens. And we're going to talk about what those do as we move on through 202. So you'll get more later on both the thyroid gland and the adrenal gland. What I want you to take away from me is that the anterior pituitary stimulates the thyroid and the adrenal cortex to then release more hormones. And then we're going to talk about what those hormones do in a later video. The other anterior pituitary hormones, again, more later. You're going to see this really more detail when we talk about the reproductive system. We've got a lot more information about LH and FSH. We talk about the menstrual cycle, estrogen, testosterone, all those things that are going on with reproduction. Luteinizing hormone, LH, and FSH, they both have their target as the ovary and the testes. Okay, but they have different actions. When luteinizing hormone goes to the ovary, it stimulates egg development. Basically, what did I say there? I'm sorry, FSH. When FSH goes to the ovary, you get egg development and estrogen. LH stimulates ovulation and also estrogen and progesterone secretion. In the testes, FSH is for sperm development and LH stimulates testosterone secretion. Okay, so you have two different hormones working on both the female ovary, you guys should know that, and the male testes. So you get sperm and egg development, and you get estrogen and testosterone production by these sex organs. Again, you'll get more information about that as you move on through reproduction. All right, the two that I want to focus on for the rest of my talk are prolactin and growth hormone. And just get used to these abbreviations, because most of the time people don't want to write them out, and you're going to see GH, PRL, that's just the way we write it, so just get used to those abbreviations. Growth hormone and prolactin. Prolactin, released by the anterior pituitary, acts on breast tissue, mammary glands, and stimulates milk production. Growth hormone stimulates bone, muscle, and fat growth. Now, let's go specifically on prolactin. Got that stimulation of milk production. It's primarily controlled by a prolactin inhibiting hormone. That's its primary control mechanism. It tends to follow estrogen levels throughout a female's monthly cycle. Okay, so as your estrogen levels rise and fall during your monthly cycle, prolactin levels tend to rise and fall. And this may be a big contributor around your menstrual cycle while your breasts are swollen and tender. It's kind of a side effect of that prolactin. Now, at the end of pregnancy, as you get toward your last trimester of pregnancy, your 9th month, these blood levels start to rise. They're basically prepping your breast to get ready for the baby. So when the baby comes, you're able to produce milk. Now, within the first 24 to 48 hours after birth, you'll start producing milk. And the more the baby suckles, the more PRH, the more prolactin, or prolactin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, is released, causing more, that's HT, more suckling causes prolactin-releasing hormone to be released by the hypothalamus. That causes the anterior pituitary to release prolactin. Prolactin works on the breast tissue, and you get more milk. So the more the baby suckles, the more prolactin you get, the more milk production. It allows you to keep producing milk. As long as the baby suckles, you should be able to continue making milk for years even. Okay, another anterior pituitary, growth hormone. Now you have growth hormone has basically two effects. It has metabolic effects and it has growth. Just think about, your developmental, bigger bones, bigger muscles, things like that. Let's talk about how that works. Now growth hormone works on most cells, but it targets bone and muscle. Think about getting bigger and taller, okay? Targets bone and muscle. It promotes protein synthesis, which makes sense because if you want to get taller and have bigger muscles, you've got to have more protein. Muscles made out of protein. You have protein synthesis, and it encourages the use of fats for fuel. So you're going to maybe have energy stores. Use your energy stores for growth. You have growth hormone secreted throughout your life, and it's it's the most abundant pituitary hormone. You have lots of growth hormone. You have it all through your life. You have more of it when you're young, but you have it the rest of your life. This is kind of a complicated slide, but growth hormone does a lot of things. This is one of those flow charts to kind of get us thinking about what's going on. We'll start with our hypothalamus again. It's either going to make a releasing hormone or an inhibiting hormone. So for this example, let's say it's doing a releasing hormone. So it's growth hormone, releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Targets the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is then stimulated to produce growth hormone and release growth hormone. Growth hormone can either work indirectly or directly. Directly, it goes into the blood, and it causes you to increase your fat breakdown, increase energy usage from fat. It also increases carbohydrate metabolism. It allows you to increase your blood glucose by decreasing your blood glucose uptake, okay, and increasing glycogen breakdown. So instead of putting more glucose into the body, it allows you to basically not reuptake glucose as fast, so it allows glucose to stay out in the blood. Indirect effects, it will go to the liver and some other tissues, and it produces something called IGF, which are insulin-like growth factors. Don't get too hung up with IGF. I want you to look at growth factors, the GF part. These growth factors then work on the bones and the muscles. So skeletal system and extracellular. Works on the skeletal system, causes you to have increased cartilage formation and increased skeletal growth. If you remember back to 201, how are bones made? You've got to lay down cartilage, then bone comes in, so you're going to have more cartilage formation, more bone growth. Increased protein synthesis, cell growth, proliferation. Again, think about your muscles growing. Muscles are made out of protein. So the more protein you can make, the bigger your muscles can get. Once you have enough IGF out in your bloodstream, there's enough, you don't need any more. You need to kind of slow that process down. Those IGFs feed back. Okay, if you've got too much or you have enough, it's going to inhibit the growth hormone releasing factor, and it's going to stimulate growth hormone inhibiting factor. That way, the anterior pituitary doesn't send any more growth hormone out. Make sense? All right, just play with this chart and look at your feedback loops and see where all growth hormone has its effects. Now, what if something goes wrong? What if there's something wrong with growth hormone? If you have hypersecretion, which is too much, in children, you get something called gigantism. In gigantism, basically what's happening is there's too much growth hormone and it's stimulating those epiphyseal plates. Remember back in 201 where the bones grow and you have those growth plates in the bones? They're still open and you're getting extra growth hormone causing those epiphyseal plates to grow really, really fast, usually too fast. And you can get this is a 12-year-old boy, he's 6'5". You can get up to like 8 feet tall with gigantism. Now hypersecretion of growth hormone A lot of times that's associated with some kind of a tumor of the anterior pituitary, a tumor causing too much growth hormone to be released. So this is in the child. After your epiphyseal plates close, if you have a tumor and you have over-secretion or hyper-secretion of GH, or growth hormone, it's called acromegaly. And this is Andre the Giant. If you guys have seen Princess Bride, he's the guy in The Princess Bride, and this is Andre the Giant. So your epiphyseal plates have closed. You're not going to get any taller, but you're going to get basically bigger structures, typically in the hands, in the head, and the jaw. You're going to see these really large hands and really big, distinct jaw lines if you have acromegaly. It tends to put a toll on other organ systems. I know Andre the Giant actually died of heart failure at a fairly young age, so it's not usually a good thing to have acromegaly. Now, what happens if you don't have enough growth hormone? If you don't have enough growth hormone as an adult, it's really not that big a deal. They can give you supplements, and it's not that big a deal. If you have hyposecretion or low GH as a child, as you're trying to grow, and you don't have that growth hormone stimulating those growth plates, pituitary dwarfism can result. And this is actually Warwick Davis, and he's the little elf in, or goblin in Harry Potter. And so Flitwick, you may have recognized him. He's got pituitary dwarfism, which means you're short in stature. It can be proportional or disproportionate. You've seen dwarfs sometimes that look like they're a little out of proportion than others. Just kind of depends on the cause behind the dwarfism. Now, if it's caught early enough, if the doctors notice that maybe you're not growing as fast as maybe you should be, there have been some advances made in giving growth hormone to children to try to overcome that deficit. Now, last but not least, we have melanocyte-stimulating hormone. It's not really that big of a hormone. Just kind of throw it in there just because it's there. We have some teeny tiny little levels inside humans. You see it a little bit more in fetal development. It regulates melanin. If you guys go back to 201, talk about skin cancer. What makes your skin dark? What's that darkening pigment? Melanin. So melanocyte-stimulating hormone can stimulate that melanin production. You see it a whole lot more in lower vertebrates, animals that are brightly colored and they're trying to change their coloration. You'll see it a little more important in lower vertebrates than in humans, but we do have it, and so I'm throwing it in there just because it's interesting. That is all I have to say. If you have any questions, please come find me or your instructor. And I hope you have a good day and good luck studying. Thank you.